In today's episode, we're joined by author and psychiatrist Dr. Claire Payne. Dr. Payne helps us to better understand how trauma is specifically different from other types of strong emotions, such as grief or shame. She also shares with us the impacts of sexual abuse and betrayal, and she breaks down the groundbreaking adverse childhood event study that directly correlates specific types of childhood trauma with early all-cause morbidity and mortality. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to our show as we continue on with our trauma recovery series. And today's guest is Dr. Claire Payne. And Dr. Payne was one of the guests, again, like Pat Ogden, that I had spoken with about a year and a half ago. So right back at the very beginning of COVID was when I had talked with Dr. Payne. And I came across her work very much as I was looking for some of the other people that I was interested in, I was learning from, and her name kept popping up at different times as well. She had done work with Dr. Pat Ogden and Dr. Ruth Lanius. And so as I came across her work, I thought she would be a really great guest. She's also an author. She's written several books. She's still a clinician. She sees patients on a regular basis. And there are so many pieces throughout this episode that I think have such tremendous value. So we get into things like a little bit deeper understanding with what PTSD is. We talk more about the repercussions of sexual abuse. We look at the healing power of grief, the necessity for being able to develop emotional literacy. So being able to actually feel something in the body and then be able to actually label it so that we know what that feeling is. A lot of times in trauma, there's this big disconnect and we don't even realize what we're actually feeling anymore. And there's a lot of healing that happens in just being able to reconnect and make those connections again. And one of the things that I think is probably one of the most important things that we talk about is a groundbreaking study that was called the Adverse Childhood Event Study. And this is really fascinating and so important to pay attention to. This study, and Claire will go through this in great detail, but it basically looks at 7 key adverse events that happen in childhood, and that if those events have happened, and the more of those events that have happened within a certain age range, it correlates directly with early cause morbidity and mortality. So the more of these events that you took place in your childhood, basically the sooner that you start to develop disease and the sooner that you will actually die. And so it brings awareness, as she called it, to a hidden epidemic of basically adverse events that happen in childhood and then how they relate to basically all cause mortality and morbidity. So a really important piece to pay attention to, and why it's so important that we create an environment that is incredibly safe and nurturing for our children as much as we can. So I hope you enjoy Claire's episode. I really enjoyed going back through it again as I was editing it to be released. And many of the things that we talked about, even though this was probably back in April, I think last year, that we did this episode, so much of it is so relevant to where we are now. This entire series is so incredibly relevant to what's going on right now. And I think the best thing that we can do is just share this information as widely as possible so that people start to develop some of these different tools on how to work with trauma. First, even identify trauma and then be able to actually start to work with it so that we can heal our collective traumas. So I think that it is almost impossible to go through this world without having some degree of trauma. And from our experience, the more that we're able to work with that trauma and heal from that trauma, we create a space to fill it with something much more meaningful. So please share this. The easiest way to support people is to get this information out. Go to the YouTube channel. We have a bunch of other videos that are there at Dr. Jason Loken ND. You can subscribe, you can like it. That always helps with the algorithms to get this material out. And that is really our goal with this series, is just to shine a light on different aspects of trauma and provide some support for all of us that are requiring it. I'd also like to thank C60 from Purple Power for sponsoring this trauma series. Now, if you haven't heard of C60 from Purple Power yet, check out the link below or go to the inspirehealthpodcast.com website. Click the link in the top right corner and you can get 15% off your order. But C60 is essentially a very powerful free radical scavenger. So C60 stands for carbon 60. That's because it's this spherical shape that literally looks like a hollow soccer ball that's made out of 60 carbon atoms. And because of this spherical shape, it makes it incredibly unique for being a powerful free radical sponge. And it has the ability to neutralize free radicals and reset itself again and again and again. So it can keep being recycled. And C60 has an antioxidant efficacy several hundredfold higher than most conventional antioxidant that we're aware of. C60 is also a part of my overall immune system support. So some of the things that I take on a routine basis, I make sure that I get my vitamin D levels up to optimal. And I think ultimately you should get a blood test to find out where you are and make sure you get into that optimal zone. If you're not sure what the optimal zone is, go to my website at drjasonloken.com, download the free ebook that I have there called the Top 10 Labs. And that will give you a breakdown of the difference between normal and optimal zones for some of the top nutrients and different tests that I think are important to get yourself assessed with. But I'll make sure my vitamin D's up. I'll make sure I've got adequate zinc. I'll make sure that I'm taking maybe a little bit of vitamin A. Again, that one you should make sure that you talk to your healthcare professional, make sure these things are appropriate for you. And vitamin C, always an important one. And I take C60 because there's essentially 4 big things that it's been shown to do. It promotes a healthy inflammatory response throughout the body, and we know inflammation is a cornerstone for disease. It stimulates stem cell production, which in turn helps to increase production of valuable protective immune cells. It regulates the immune system so that it's more contained and efficient. And one of the big things that a lot of people are probably aware of with everything that's gone on with COVID over this last year and a half is that it can help to quiet the cytokine storm that can lead to this unchecked inflammatory response that can be a lot of problems. So that's what they're basically saying around COVID, is that it is causing this cytokine storm when people get really ill from it, and that's essentially what's causing all of the problems and the deaths is from the cytokine storm. So anything that can help to regulate my immune system more, strengthen it, and decrease inflammation and quiet a cytokine storm is definitely the kind of things that I want to be taking at this point in time. All right, everybody, thanks again for tuning in. Please share these episodes. We've got a bunch more episodes coming out for this series that I think are going to be amazing and cover lots of different pieces. So thanks again for joining. Thanks for the support, and I will talk to you guys soon. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Inspire Health podcast, and thanks for tuning into our continued series on trauma recovery. Today's guest is Dr. Claire Payne. Dr. Payne is an associate professor at the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Toronto. She's director of the Psychological Trauma Program at Mount Sinai Hospital in Toronto. And in July 2014, she was awarded an honorary doctorate from Addis Ababa University, AAU, for her work to assist the development of psychiatry in Ethiopia. Her clinical focus is on the assessment and treatment of patients, including refugees, who continue to suffer from the effects of psychological trauma. She has lectured and taught on various aspects of psychological trauma, including transcultural issues, and increasingly on global mental health. She has published a number of articles and 3 books, Trauma and the Body, A Sensory Motor Approach to Psychotherapy with Pat Ogden and Kukuni Minton, The Impact of Early Life Trauma on Health and Disease, The Hidden Epidemic, a book with Eric Vermetten and Ruth Lanius, and Psychotherapy Essentials to Go, Achieving Psychotherapy Effectiveness. Dr. Payne, it's such a pleasure to have you on the show today. Thanks so much for being a part of this really important series.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Jason.
My pleasure. So, Dr. Payne, I'm wondering if first you can just give us a little bit of an overview of your background and how you decided to make trauma recovery such a huge part of your life's professional work.
Thank you. I became a psychiatrist, and my first job, I was the only woman. When I became a psychiatrist, I was absolutely sure all I wanted to do was psychotherapy, kind of psychodynamic psychotherapy. And I was the only woman in an busy outpatient department of a hospital. And all my male colleagues said, "Oh, thank God, we've got a woman psychiatrist. Now you can deal with all these poor abused patients." And I thought, no, I've no desire to do that. That's not my, I knew my goal. And then I actually enjoyed this hospital very much. It's actually a very biological hospital. And psychotherapy was not big there. So I suddenly realized that PTSD, or when events happen, it can change people's lives. They were fine one day, kind of, and they're not fine the next day. And this is actually perfect. PTSD is where the wheels hit the ground. Through a psychological experience, people change, can be very severely affected. So I suddenly realized it's perfect. It's a perfect example of how words are so important in helping people recover or finding their way to recovery. It's a great teaching tool. And most important of all, I found the patients entirely compelling. I remember one young woman came in, sort of trailing her, we're in Canada, so trailing her scarf and her book, her bag and stuff, sort of not great, not seeming to be doing well. And after 6 months, she was a university student and had her books under her arm and going out with a different kind of walk, a different degree of confidence. And I suddenly realized patients with unresolved trauma are very compelling patients, and they are already, before they walk into your room, half the time they're on their way to recovery. And you can't say the same for schizophrenia or serious mood disorders. So compelling, and I feel I learn a great deal. I learn from every patient I see who's a trauma patient, and 30 years later, it somehow doesn't seem stale.
What areas have you ended up making more of your focus, and how did you end up arriving at those specific areas?
My two major foci in Canada are refugees. I work in two different refugee mental health clinics in downtown Toronto. So they're people who've come from very difficult situations and they're requesting refugee status here in Canada, or refugee claim, convention refugee status, on the way to becoming a permanent resident and ultimately a Canadian citizen. Very interesting people, because I'd started my career with homegrown, lovely Canadians who'd had bad childhoods, bad marriages, maybe lost some kids to CAS. Alcohol and drugs have featured in their lives. They've had very tough lives. So that was one group. And then I started working with refugees. And it's not that I'm comparing the two overtly, but I was stunned when I listened to refugees tell me the most awful stories. And yet they were fine. I mean, they were rattled and they were suffering, but they had no mental health disorder. They needed settlement services. They needed some things to help them get settled, to find their feet in Canada. But most of them didn't even have PTSD. And I think it drew my attention very helpfully to how vitally important it is that childhoods really vitally determine much of how, not all, but much of how we respond when disaster strikes as an adult.
So would you find that those refugees that you had worked with, were they actually traumatized then?
They had terrible experiences, but no matter whether they were a former Yugoslavian Serb or a Dinka tribesman, they'd had childhoods where they were cherished and respected. And it's compatible with the literature, but as adults, they had some, because of that kind of childhood, they had some capacity to manage, or they had some resilience that enabled them to manage as best they could with a horrible situation. Not, I want to emphasize, they didn't, it's not that they didn't suffer, but they didn't get a mental health condition. Whereas I think many of my patients who have had terrible childhoods struggle more to access their resilience, to develop and access their resilience.
Mm-hmm. Well, that brings me to a question then. How do you describe trauma? And how is trauma different from other types of suffering, such as grief or neglect or something along those lines? What's the difference?
I mean, I always laugh with our residents in hospital and say, these days we medicalize language. So, if I go to a shoe shop, a sale, and the sale has ended, or the sale is somebody's bought the pair of shoes that I was waiting to go on sale, I'm going to say to my family, "Oh my God, that was so traumatic," And so we have changed in a way everything by no longer having the kind of language we've had for centuries to describe various kinds of suffering that are kind of ubiquitous. We all go through it sooner or later, one way or the other. So for me, I'm a bit picky. I keep trauma as a traumatic experience is an experience that has involved fear, horror, and helplessness, which is kind of the DSM-4 criteria, 4TR criteria. It's about being trapped and terrified, and it gives rise to a different kind of physiology, and it gives rise to a different kind of model you need to treat it. Mm-hmm. As we all know, complex PTSD is there's no such thing as PTSD in a way. It's so quickly comorbid or is accompanied anyway by depression, anxiety, maybe panic, alcohol, substance abuse disorders, isolation, problem at work, problem with friends, problem with family. So it very quickly becomes something else that involves a whole lot of other emotions. But for me, trauma, unresolved trauma, begins with terror, and terror you can't get away from. We everybody, I don't actually, but a lot of people pay a lot of money to go see horror movies. It's not my thing, but it's kind of cool. You can kind of modify what you see. You can cuddle up with your significant other. There's a way in which we play with fear in order perhaps to understand it better or to resolve, in some ways, fear. I think, am I right? Aristotle. Somebody smart like that said theatre is about resolving fear and pity. So there is a way in which fear is part of our heritage and something we all have to grapple with from the earliest of infancies. But in psychiatry anyway, residents are very quick to describe depression. Mm-hmm. But I feel there's not enough training for all of us around fear, disorders that originate with fear.
That's interesting that you even mentioned theater, because whether it was Aristotle or someone else smart, but that's one of that group. Aristotle, Socrates, Plato, one of them.
Maybe Plato, yeah.
But yeah, even the mention of theater that's actually one of the therapies that a lot of times people are incorporating now to help work with theater with trauma. It sounds like. I know Bessel van der Kolk was talking about that. That's one of the big ones that they incorporate is theater work to be able to, again, almost play with different roles and play with different experiences in a way that lets them almost filter it without getting restuck with it.
Yeah, and I think that's wonderful. When I think of the patients who I have or I have had with PTSD, and I'm actually thinking of Rwandan genocide survivors. There's no play. They live their life, and I'm thinking, obviously, I'm not going to mention any details whatsoever, but on the surface, their lives are productive. They're working with families, but almost every minute of the day, they're trying not to get hijacked by triggers in their environment that give them the worst flashbacks I've ever seen in my life. So I think theatre is wonderful. I think these things are all parts of staged treatment. But I'm in the very, very lucky position as a Canadian psychiatrist that I see people who are poor, who can't afford a non-OHIP therapist. And I don't know sometimes whether all of us, or psychiatrists in Canada, see a different kind of group of patients who perhaps teach us slightly different things. But on the whole, I believe that, and one of your questions later on is about procedural and explicit memory, or implicit and explicit memory. I do think we have to do some work in helping a person to experience and express their unresolved traumatic experience in words before they can really start making meaning and reflect. I'm just not sure how you move ahead. The body work can certainly help with that, but it's very clear from Pat's work and what she says that her work is in conjunction with language.
One thing that was interesting when I was talking to Ruth Lanius too, and looking at some of the work there, was she does a lot of work with the functional MRIs and whatnot, and brain scans, and sort of seeing what's going on. Where does language play into it with, it seems, and maybe you can explain this a little bit better to me, but it seems like sometimes, depending on what's going on or how that person processed the trauma, sometimes different areas in the brain get literally downregulated or don't work so well or get shut down. And if those are an area that is tied with kind of language in that, how do you mitigate that? Where do you start if there's certain areas where it seemed to me that sometimes even having certain conversations around things just won't even resonate somewhere because the parts of the brain that need to be on to make sense of that aren't really working so well? So
it's such a good point. And we know Broca's area kind of shuts down this speechless terror that Bessel spoke of some years ago from an MRI, fMRI from Rausch. And certainly Ruth's work is superbly relevant and of international importance in this area. I mean, I'm a clinician, so I'm not looking at brain scans when I look at my patient. And one of the things I think my patients have taught me is that, I don't know how vivid an example. I have a very good example. It might be a bit too, but it's just so, it's the moment I kind of understood in a way, or I shouldn't say that as though understanding is static. It opened my eyes. Mm-hmm. This young woman had been sexually assaulted as her first sexual experience at 17 on a kind of a date. He was driving her home and he raped her in appalling ways, but almost no treatment. And it's hard to, she taught me a lot. But one of the things that I remember was every morning, I'd see her in the mornings and she'd come in and she'd say, I started throwing up or trying to throw up this morning as usual. And she had told me some of the details of her rape, and one of them was that she'd been orally raped. And I kept thinking in my psychodynamic way, which is not, it's a good idea, it's good to be psychodynamic, I think, but you need techniques, which I've enjoyed sort of adding to that little nest. A few good eggs in the nest of techniques are helpful. So this woman, I kept thinking, am I forcing something on her? Am I forcing some therapy on her that's making her, as the oral rape did, kind of throw up? And none of those kinds of ideas none of them seemed to fly. And then one day, it was just the right kind of timing. She came in, and she was holding up her toothbrush, and she's saying, every time I brush my teeth, I get to heave. And I said something, I can't remember exactly, but I said something like, oh, does it remind you of anything? Or is that like it was? Some little hint. And she said, oh no. Oh, do you think is it like the oral rape? Is my toothbrush like his penis, do you think? And I said, I don't know, but what do you think? And it was like, I mean, these things never usually happen, but it was kind of like magic, that little aspect of therapy. Because she added, oh, you know what? He was leaning on my chest. He had his knees on my chest. And I always think I have asthma in the morning or allergies because my chest always feels tight. And with that kind of little realization that she had, and in my own mind, it was like when the implicit becomes explicit, the symptom left. Because she'd found words. Now, helping somebody to find words is very difficult, but I think that you remember that old series on TV, Columbo, kind of being dumb and curious in a sort of thoughtful way, helps people stumble into their own words. You can't give them the words. I mean, she'd already described the rape, right? That aspect of the rape. She'd already described it to me, but it hadn't connected.
Yeah.
So one of the things about trauma, which makes it different from grief or other things, is because you don't know what you know. You don't know. I mean, your body knows. I had a patient who was in a fire, and one day, an apartment fire. She was, thank God, fine, shaken. She was rescued, but she came in one day and she said, "I've got flu," and I said, "I'm sorry to hear that. When did it start?" And she said, "Well, I woke up okay. It kind of came on as I was driving to see you." And on carefully sort of breaking it down, what had happened was she'd heard a siren, and she'd had to stop, open her car door, and vomit. She came to it. We sort of found out that was the cause. But her body knew. Her body heard a siren and freaked out. But her explicit memory, she had no inkling. She confabulated a reason for vomiting, but it wasn't until we just slowed the pace and just carefully walked through that she knew what she knew. So I think that's one of the distinguishing features about trauma, that you can talk a lot about it, but dialogue, as Bessel is always hammering home, rightly so, just chatting or talking doesn't really work. You have to spot and see ways in which the trauma is inaccessible except by sensory means, and that becomes your focus.
Dr. Payne, you talked a little bit about terrified and trapped being real fundamental parts that had to take place for trauma to occur. And that reminds me a lot of Peter Levine would talk a lot about immobility and fear and those things taking place at the same time. Outside of some of the classic ways that a lot of people would think of being traumatized, like in a severe motor vehicle accident or in abuse situations or in war or something along those lines, what are some of the other ways that might be more widespread that people may not think about or be quite so aware of? Because I know I find a lot of times what you just explained, that's not that far off for a lot of people. A lot of times I find that people can have symptoms, that's things that pop up that they're not necessarily completely cognizant of, and until, like you did, where you brought a certain awareness to it and let them sort of come to it on their own. But I think that happens more so than people are aware of. And I'm just wondering if you can go through, what are some of the other ways that that could happen that people just might not think of?
Other causes of trauma.
Yeah, an example, one that I've seen a few times now, that I thought was really, that I wouldn't have thought about until learning more about it, was even with medical procedures. You know, for example, even I've seen that during one patient that was very traumatized from a traumatic birth. Even one patient from an MRI where they felt like they were immobile and they were really scared around the whole experience of it. Would that be something that would constitute a trauma, or what other ways can that show up?
I mean, it's hard for me to comment on cases that aren't mine, but certainly with that MRI, I would be highly suspicious that that was a trigger, not a trauma.
Hmm.
That something had happened earlier in that person's life that was terrifying, and they
Hmm.
were trapped. And that was just suddenly a huge memory, not memory. They were re-experiencing something because it was so similar.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, to be quite honest, I don't think I've ever treated a trauma patient who wasn't traumatized by another person's cruelty, known or unknown. I mean, I think drunken uncles at Christmas may simply not know how cruel they're being, whereas some sexual predators know exactly how cruel they're being. So, underneath, what was I thinking of? Oh, yeah. I was called by a family doctor who said, I have a patient who just survived a massacre in such and such country. She's very shaken. Will you see her? I said, yes. She had survived the massacre with remarkable courage and capacity. It was the sexual abuse of her childhood that was killing her. So I over and over again, I just see mostly sexual perpetrators, but people who are holding hostage in various ways somebody sexually, physically, or psychologically. I don't know anything else that causes trauma. I mean, motor vehicle accidents do. They're complicated, at least being very frank.
Hmm.
They're complicated in a way because they involve money. And indeed, PTSD was the first, in the First World War, this was a problem then, that soldiers were ultimately, a doctor had to decide, was this a war injury that required a pension, or was it not? And I think we're still at the same stage with car accidents. It's like they're complicated by the fact that insurance is involved, and somehow you have to prove to the people that you are suffering, and that's very complicated. So I think it's easier to treat motor vehicle accidents. People need support. Absolutely, they need support and help. But I think it's easier for people once the monetary issues have been fixed. And then quite often you find in the treatment of such patients, betrayal traumas are significantly affecting their, it's bound to happen. We are all, we have meaning kind of circuits that build on each other. So my meaning of what happens to me today will definitely refer back to other experiences with other meanings, or with similar meanings.
Hmm.
Sorry, that's a bit long-winded.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. Well, and you'd mentioned a few times back, even with childhood trauma, and I know your book, The Impact of Early Life Trauma on Health and Disease, the Hidden Epidemic. I was looking at some of your work that you've done, and you talk about the adverse childhood experiences, or the ACE score, and the relationship that that has to biopsychosocial health and mortality. And I was astounded. I think I remember at a lecture went a long time back, and Gabor Mate talked about something along those lines too. But the way you broke it down was really quite astounding. And I'm wondering if you can share a little bit of what the adverse childhood experiences is, and what that ACE score represents, and what it can outplay into.
I mean, and it's funny you should be so hit over the head with that. Me too. I remember Bessel, in one of his Boston conferences, brought Folletti with this incredible. The first study was first study that was the year it was written up was 1998, and it was amazing. It was not written by psychiatry or psychology. It was written by basically family medicine people. It was Kaiser Permanente in the States, in San Diego. They had a huge, I can't remember the number, something like 17,000 patients who were enrolled in the local family medicine clinics, so that all their past medical illnesses and risk factors were known. And then they were invited to into a survey where they were asked some very simple, very few questions to decide if they had been sexually, physically, or emotionally abused as children. This is all about their childhood. Whether one of their family members had been to jail, or had been suicidal, depressed, or had been a substance abuser. I think that's right. Oh, seventh one, who had witnessed their mother being the victim of domestic violence. So there were just seven kind of very simple categories. That elegance is simply that it was yes, no. Didn't matter if you'd been sexually abused 1,500 times or not, or once. You had an ACE score of 1 for all of those seven categories. You got 1, 0, or 1 or more. So your maximum score was 7. And then, like, the people who responded to the survey were middle-aged people, mostly white, mostly with college education. And the sad truth is that the prevalence of their reported abuse, or the categories of their adverse childhood experience, was kind of not surprising. And I think the sexual abuse category was like 22%, which seems awful. But these were privileged people. It just shows that we can all be very blind to how high the prevalence is of childhood abuse. Anyway, so they scored the people, and then they checked their risk factors, and they're in the West, different in low-income countries, but in the West there are about 10 risk factors, and kind of lifestyle things: drug abuse and obesity and depression and suicidal struggles with suicide, many sexual partners. I don't have them in front of me, but they're very important risk factors, because they really do demonstrate you're more likely to die of the ordinary things we all die of, but younger. So the morbidity and mortality of the people with higher ACE scores was considerably more than people with low ACE scores. So it was the first time, I believe, that we've ever seen an absolute relationship between psychological injury in childhood and early morbidity and mortality, graded. The more ACE, the closer to 7 you had, the more likely you were to die early and to be sick early. Same things that we all die of, like cancer, accidents, I don't know, what else do we die of? Cancer, accidents, cardiac disease.
Cardiovascular disease, yeah.
Cardiovascular. So it's like, it's not that the illnesses changed, it just meant that you were much, much more likely to get them early and to die younger. Now, they obviously, if you've had a very rough life, you are going to take to bad habits like smoking or drinking or other things that will increase your risk. But they actually organize that statistically to check, despite having those kind of bad habits, whether that accounted for early morbidity and mortality. And they didn't. They still died earlier, even though you could, despite the fact that even without those risk factors being taken into account, they still died younger. And the idea is perhaps there's some kind of stress mechanism that's independent of smoking, drinking, other kinds of risk factors that are going to make you, for sure, make you more likely to die early. So I think that taught us, I mean, it was so funny that it was family medicine and not psychiatry that's trying to draw a line between the dots, but I think we have for the first time, and they've gone on to investigate, and they've added I think 3 more categories, but that first study I think is the change. It's a game changer.
I thought it was huge, and whenever I hear anything about epidemics, whatever they might be, that runs through my head as one of the probably most important things that we should be focusing resources on more than anything, because it has such, it's so far reaching in so many different areas, as far as anything from all the different habits right to earlier mortality. I mean, that was really quite amazing, and you could see the higher you got closer to 7, just the increase the percentages went. It was a really simple study to understand what you're looking at too.
You know, while you're talking, I don't know if this is appropriate, but I did look out my slides, because it's early morbidity and mortality is awful. The most extraordinary other points, like early depression, massively more common in the higher the ACE studies, the more the depression. Suicide attempts increase with the number of ACE scores. Antidepressants prescription, hallucinations, interesting enough, somatoform symptoms increase enormously with increased ACE studies. Memories, impaired memory of childhood increases with the number of ACE studies. Smoking increases. Alcoholism, as self-defined alcoholism, increases. Drug use, in fact, male children with an ACE score of 6 or more have a 46-fold increased likelihood of later becoming an injection drug user compared to a male child with an ACE score of 0. Early paternity, early pregnancy, and early intercourse by age 15, teen pregnancy, teen paternity. It goes up, as you could just see these histograms, the higher the score is, the higher the risk, likelihood for these difficulties. Job problems, financial problems, again, it all goes up. Absenteeism, serious financial problems, serious job problems, and most tragic of all in somewhere, like you shouldn't, tragedy isn't comparative, but as you go up in ACE scores, fewer and fewer people live to be 65. In fact, if you've had more ACE score, if you've had 4 or more ACE scores, your chances of living to 65 are extremely low.
Wow.
So it's extraordinary. It's brilliant, and it's it's a public health. When we wrote the book, we felt so strongly. We said the title should be "The Hidden Epidemic: And our publishers said, if you do that, the only people will be watching, the only people who will be reading your book are people who are interested in malaria. You know.
Yeah.
So we had to make it a subtitle.
You had to preface it.
Yeah. But it's the most important public health
Yeah.
emergency of our time. And if we even if we only care about dollars to families in need would be well spent.
No, I agree with you completely. I thought that was really
It's
quite important. I
Colette's a
wanted to.
genius. Yeah, thank you.
What is the relationship with choice and trauma, and the role of meaning in trauma?
If we, so there's no way, of course this is self-evident, but there's no way we can take away the trauma or the memory of the trauma or the experience of the trauma in a person's life. So I guess therapists, all of us, put our eggs in the is in the basket of trying to help a person reflect on what's happened so that they have choice. Without, people find treatment in many ways. Therapy is not the only way people recover at all. In fact, it's probably the minority recover. Most people recover because they have good families, good friends, good colleagues, decent work, etc. But for those people who are stuck, it's like their procedural memory doesn't give them enough time to reflect on what's happening. So a bang, you hear a bang in the house. Maybe it's a screen door, maybe somebody dropped something. But people who have not recovered from trauma will jump under the table or cower. That's procedural memory. And it's very useful. In a war, that probably keeps us all alive. But if you're at a conference or you're running a meeting and you're suddenly ducking under the table, that's really not, it no longer has a useful, it's going to make your life worse, not better. So helping somebody, I don't want to say stop that procedural memory, it's not the right language, but slowing things down so people can see that the loud noise makes them want to jump under the table. Why? And sort of opening that and sort of examining that to free them of this need simply to react will give them choice. Without choice, they just reproduce over and over again the fear circuit or the procedural memory that gets them to move first. And it's no longer adaptive. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
choice,
that makes.
Makes sense. The idea about reflection, in a way, we take it. Reflection is essential, I would say, but we would take it into mentalizing, so that, and for sexual abuse, I continually get drawn back to this as a sort of ultimately the requirement for recovery. That wonderful people, and I'm going to say women because most of my patients are women, wonderful women who would never blame anyone, any child, for being abused, will blame themselves and despise that 4-year-old or 8-year-old or 10-year-old or 13-year-old. They'll hate them. So it's not just reflection. They know they despise that child in them, but it's like taking the part of the child, recognizing that that child was terrified, had no choice, did the best they could. And it's that capacity, it's sort of empathy plus, to understand what they've been through. And it's not even about forgiveness, it's about recognizing how dreadful it is for a 6-year-old to be in that position, and never blaming that kid for it. And it's that kind of engagement, really, with the part of themselves that's been walled off in a procedural way that I think ultimately is required, certainly with sexual abuse, before healing can happen. Otherwise, reflection is good, but it can be a little bit academic, it can be a little bit intellectual. And you really want them, and there's some good exercise. I have, there's some good techniques for helping somebody truly respond to their child, the child that they were when they were abused.
When I think about it, in a lot of ways, it's like that, because then it seems to me that then sometimes what happens is when something's happened to a child, and then that child has a really small tool belt with how to manage their world with, and so then they develop whatever way that they can to manage it, whatever that is, whether that's anger or dissociation or whatever works for them at that point in time, given that they have small skill set to deal with their world around them. And then when those strategies that were almost like survival strategies for them keep happening as they get into adulthood, and now those strategies are creating more troubles for them because they're not necessarily an adaptive way to work with it anymore. How do you begin the process of assisting someone in literally unlearning, or I think you use the term even unusing, the defense behaviors that were once used for protection, but now are not actually helping them anymore? How do you start that process, and what does that look like?
It's so simple, and so for most people instinctual, that the hard thing is to try and identify scientifically, which of course Peter Fonagy and Alan have all done some brilliant work. And I think we have a skill set because our parents or caregivers have behaved towards us with the recognition of our affect. So if you're crying or if you're happy, your caregiver will say, "Oh, you've just come home from school and you're crying." So the affect is recognized, and then a caregiver will say, "What happened?" There's always a reason that a kid will cry or be happy or be angry or whatever. And good caregiving, I mean, it's a little bit more than that, but those two linked components kids have a very hard time, because if no one names your affect, in a way you can grow up not knowing what you're feeling. You feel, but you don't have the words to describe it. You're basically sort of functionally alexithymic. So this little process that parents do, we do to each other, it's a very it's only instinctual if you've been lucky enough to have decent caregiving yourself. And a lot of therapy is exactly that. So that if a patient comes in and they're kind of not, something's amiss, you pick up that they're not comfortable or they're not happy with you or something's going on. Because as therapists we say, "Oh, Mrs. Smith, is something the matters? It doesn't seem like you're as comfortable as you were last week," or whatever. That inquiry, gently and tactfully noting there's a different affect, and then if she says, "Yes, well, I'm not feeling great today," and then we all say, "Well, what happened?" It's linking those two that then allow a child to recognize their own feelings. Like if somebody snatches a toy from them, they'll say, "Don't do that, it makes me angry." Or they'll know they're angry, they're pissed off or irritated. And it gives you the opportunity to help kids negotiate, right? So somebody snatches a toy, you're angry that Johnny snatched your toy. What are you going to say to him? Are you going to ask for it back nicely? So you start to do these kind of ordinary social skills, but a child can't develop to manage the difficulties that we all face in life if they don't know what they feel. And it's because of course, if you don't know what you feel, you also can't read the faces of other people.
Mhm.
Kids who aren't mentalized by their caregivers when they're growing up have no idea how to read the expression on other people's faces. So they're very poorly equipped to understand themselves and understand others. And they'll misattribute motivation to others because they're not reading it right. So what do we do as therapists to help people? We mentalize them. Just like I said, Mrs. Smith, doesn't seem right today. Can you say what happened? Or how are you doing? I try actually as a therapist not to sort of say, how are you feeling? Sometimes it's useful. But as you were saying earlier, experience is very layered. It's built up of a number of kind of building blocks, which are cognitive and physical and psychological, emotional. So I don't want to necessarily zone in on the feeling if she doesn't know what she's feeling, because alexithymic patients, they won't be able to necessarily answer you accurately. So yeah, you have to mentalize the patient and they pick it up. We're humans. We learn from being done to. You can't teach mentalizing except to do it. And then it becomes a source of reflection.
Right. Yeah. And is there for patients that are, well, I think even outside of trauma, I feel like in general, a lot of people are just not necessarily really connected to what they're feeling on a regular basis either. I mean, I think in some ways it was probably a bit of a discredited thing over the years, and sometimes whether we discredit our own feelings or if they were discredited for us or if we just didn't think they were important, or you feel something and then you still go ahead and do something even though you talk yourself into it, even though you're kind of ignoring that maybe body sensation that arises, that almost instinctual feeling, right? Is there a place where body-centered psychotherapy assists with that reconnection back to the feeling sense of the body?
Let me take a detour first. I think one of the things that you've very well described is how, for a bunch of reasons, we don't feel connected with or trust our gut. And I often say to my patients, my women patients in particular, but not only women, men too. When you go into a subway or streetcar, or a waiting room or somewhere with strangers in it, you make an immediate choice based on a quick look around, and you trust your gut and you sit where you think you're going to be safest. You don't want to sit next to the drunken frat boys or the sort of scary guy who looks at people weirdly. This isn't about the poor suffering people on the subway, but you have to trust your gut. And I think one of the things about abuse is that people don't. Sometimes they don't even hear their gut, and which is a more difficult problem than if you hear your gut and discount it. That's much closer to being possible to make judgments, arbitrary judgments that feel right for you without having to sort of run them by everybody else. So the hardest part is if you simply don't have a gut that you trust. You're so out of touch in a way with that little feedback loop. And that's the bit I think that body work, there's so many different ways, but certainly in sensory motor psychotherapy, one of the marvelous things I think is to help your patients develop a vocabulary for body. So normally if I say to you, Jason, how are you feeling? You might say, well, I'm feeling okay. I'm a little tired. It's a Sunday. Maybe, what else might you say? Maybe I'm a little bored or I'm a little amused. But if you ask a patient, what are you feeling in your body? They'll kind of answer like that. They'll answer in an approximation of emotions. So the different vocabulary is, where do you feel, do you have any part of your body that's kind of speaking to us right now? Okay, your shoulders. What's happening with your shoulders? People say, well, I'm really scared. And you say, okay, but what are your shoulders saying? Are they tight or loose or gurgling or crunchy, or, so that people get a non-emotional vocabulary for a descriptor of their tummy feelings or leg feelings or whatever's going on. So they start, Damasio influenced us in writing that sensory motor psychotherapy book, that one's emotions start in one's body. But many people who've had significant abuse don't have a body. They're kind of numb from the eyes to the toes. So it's really one of the first things is to have a vocabulary and say, well, what are you feeling in your body right now? And they say, oh, my tummy, I've got butterflies, or I'm feeling a little bit tight in my shoulders or something. So then you can say, well, what do you think that's saying to you, or when did that come on? So you start to break down these layers of experience, so people have the chance to kind of, I won't say relearn, but to kind of just a little pause to figure out how their thoughts and the feelings in their body and their emotions kind of chime in together.
It's almost like just giving them the space to
Yeah.
allow that
Yeah.
their own innate wisdom's going to
Yeah.
try to pull some of the pieces together a little bit for them
Yeah.
in their own way at the timing that probably works best for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Claire, I want to, sorry, go
Sorry,
ahead.
can I say, I do think, I run a group for trauma patients. I do think that one of the things that that trauma patients, many trauma patients, not all, they benefit from a sort of emotional literacy. So again, on this idea of alexithymia, not being able to name, they may be angry as I had one woman, she came as a patient, she said, I'm very angry, can you help me with my anger? So I said, sure. How did this come up? And she said, well, my partner says I'm really angry. I said, well, what's your partner noticing? She said, I throw things at the wall. So this woman had no first-hand relationship between her own emotions and the words to describe them. And I think that's very usual, the very usual long-term problem for poor old trauma patients, is that they don't know, they don't have that emotional literacy. And that because their caretakers never said, oh, you're crying, what happened? Oh, I failed my French exam. Oh, I'm so sorry. What a nuisance. Do you have to do it again? There was no engagement in the child's inner life. The child was not seen to have emotions, ambitions, opinions, ideas, fantasies, all of that invisible thing that makes us up internally in the invisibility of our inner life was never acknowledged growing up. So trauma patients have had to pretty well stuff it, because if they do feel something, it's hijacking. They're completely thrown, they lose it in a shop and get issued out by security, or they dissociate because they've never explored and understood and had enjoyment, let alone tolerance, for the range of their emotions and why they're meaningful and how they can enjoy them. So I think emotional literacy, it's the single most important thing for trauma patients. Very hard to have an explicit memory of your trauma if you don't know if you're feeling angry.
Well, I've noticed for some people when they are trying to explain what they feel, it seems like sometimes it can go from they notice when they are just completely overwhelmed or enraged, and everything in between kind of blurs together. It's, you know,
Exactly.
so I like that they're able to start the reconnection sort of with what the different emotions are, so they have this
Yeah,
broader landscape to be able
that's
to
right.
choose from.
It's so awful if the only way you can, it's, if you, the only way you feel able to register a complaint in Winners is by screaming and being issued out by security guards. It's like, then that's a whole bunch of shame and upset and complications in and of itself, and you never get, that person never really gets a chance to explore the origins of all of this. And when they do, I think what happens is there's a lot of sadness, and that's often when people start connecting with grief. You spoke about earlier. I think with trauma, you have to, or unresolved trauma, I should say, you have to get to grief. You have to have a reflective recall of what you know about whatever bad things happened to you. And then there is a sense of mourning and regret and a lot of other feelings that naturally well up. But if you don't know, like that woman I described who was throwing up on her way to see me, if you don't know what's making you throw up, that it's sirens, it's fear that's making you throw up, it's very hard to start to get to grief. And, you know, in that fire, maybe somebody she loved was killed or was burned. It's very hard to grieve the loss of somebody you love if you don't even know what happened.
Hmm.
So it was Aristotle, by the way.
Now we know for sure. But yeah, you had mentioned about the importance of the healing power of grief, and often it's an emotion that I find people don't want to touch because it can be so painful. But it seems like it's also so healing though when you allow yourself to.
Oh, I think it's a therapist's best friend because, you know, like Pat showed me this, and gosh, a lesson I'll never ever lose, I hope, and so helpful. When you listen to somebody who's crying because of their trauma and you listen to somebody who's crying out of grief, it's an entirely different sound sensation. And again, I think it's quite difficult to describe, especially if we don't have any sound of the two possibilities. But I think that almost all of us, it's like when somebody finally sobs at the loss of their baby, their leg, their sister, their whatever. It's like such a relief. They can finally kind of express it, know it, feel it, live it, express it, share it. And there's a kind of sharing of that grief that I think is the deal with us humans. You know, I think in a way, as soon as we get born, we lose. We lose our mother's belly. As soon as we walk, we lose her walking us around on her hip. We get good at walking. We start to talk. We have to go to school. We lose hanging out with our caregivers at home. You know, and on it goes. We are born for loss. Often, the loss of things actually leaves room for other things, which are good. But the only recourse we have for our lives of loss is grief. And I sometimes say to my patients, you know, we've all got tear ducts, and that's for a reason. That if you, like poor old Queen Victoria, you know, she never really grieved Albert. So she was in black for, I don't know how many years after his death, a couple of decades. So grief is a necessary, as is loss, is inevitable in our lives. Grief is the best thing we can do. And we all, in any religion, in any culture, we have ceremonies for grief and loss. We have ways of speaking and respecting each other and sharing each other's loss. And it works. proper grief allows people to make room for renewed things, including of course is hope.
Beautiful. And kind of to tie into that, I know you've spent a lot of time working with in Ethiopia, and we had talked a little bit earlier before this about some of the ways that you had seen them deal with grief or with trauma and whatnot. And I'm wondering if you can share that in closing, because I think that's really important as well.
How their grief and trauma is similar or different to our grief, and I hate that asking them. Everything, it's like, working with refugees, for me, I've been doing it for 15 years more, changed my understanding of trauma, because it shed light on the things I was taking for granted, and suddenly this different group made me think and pay attention in a way that I hadn't, because there were unique factors about working with refugees. I can't work with Ethiopians. My Amharic isn't good enough. I have good friends who speak superb English, but I can't treat patients because I don't speak adequate. I love speaking Amharic, but my Amharic is surely kitchen Amharic. It's good, but I can't converse properly. So I'm separated really from that experience, which I resolve to learn Amharic every day better. All I know is, a bit like refugees, everything I take for granted here, everything I think is true, everything that I think makes sense, all the knowledge or bits and pieces of knowledge I kind of rely on, everything's different there, completely superficially. They have a different calendar. Their day begins at 6 o'clock and it's the first hour of the day. How they pray, how they engage, everything is different. It's a foreign country. Not only in those obvious ways, but in the invisible ways in which cultures are entirely different. People suffer, and there's no difference in the suffering between people. We share this biological complexity, our bodies, and all the complexities that go with them. So suffering is there, but I think because the meaning structures are entirely different, it's made me pay radical attention to what the gaps are in my understanding. I remember I did a grand rounds here at Sinai, and people loved it. And I was very, very proud of of course it was about childhood sexual abuse. I was very proud of my rounds. And so when I went out to Addis, I gave it to the department with the residents and the faculty, sort of waiting for the questions afterwards. And everybody claps because people are very polite. Not one question. And that's an absolute giveaway that you failed. Utterly and completely. And it's like everything that makes sense here is I can't take for granted anything here. It's not that, it's just like the assumptions, the historical knowledge base. I mean, the knowledge of what it is to be a human, what meanings are attributable, how people engage, the signs of a bad person, the signs of a good, everything that I understand here is completely different there. So I have to pay attention. And because the people are so utterly gracious, it is over and over and over again a renewal, something very, I'm very, very grateful for the ongoing kind of sense of renewed learning and interest and attention that I enjoy in engaging with my Ethiopian colleagues, friends, students. It's an addiction. If you go to Ethiopia, the only thing you think about is, when can I go back?
I think that's a really valuable lesson for almost everybody outside of the work in trauma, but just how important it is to spend time in different cultures just to realize that our epicenter is often a lot smaller than it could be, and what we have taken as a personal truth is often very different and keeps expanding as we get these different perspectives. To me, I feel like it's why I know with my kids, I have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old and a 15-year-old stepson.
Wow.
And part of my goal with my little ones right now is to take them, I want them to see different cultures firsthand regularly, and if we're able to spend chunks of time in them. It's just so that their concept of what is normal is very large.
The funny, that's wonderful. That's wonderful parenting. I mean, the thing that makes me, so I work with refugees here, and they're all from abroad, and they speak different languages, and their experiences are different. And I love working with them. But then I go to Ethiopia, and then I'm the outsider. So I have all the rules wrong. And they say things, I mean, they're very, very, very polite. But because I keep going back, finally, my closest friends or students say to me, one of them said recently, Dr. Claire, we know you love us, but why do you shout? So in Ethiopia, if you're being respectful, you talk very, very, very quietly all the time. And in my culture, middle class English Canadian culture, you have to be very clear. You have to speak up. You have to say what you think. And it's like the opposite there. So because I'm the outsider, I'm always on my back foot. I'm always off. And I know I'm inadvertently offending half the population almost all the time with complete innocence. I have no idea. But I think that's not a bad experience. It's not a bad experience for a therapist. It's not a bad experience for a white person in Africa to know nothing and shut up. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's the right stance, I think.
Wonderful. Dr. Payne, where is the best place for people to learn more about the kind of work that you're doing? Any other books that might be on the go? We'll put links in for the 3 different books that you already have, but where can people learn more about the work that you're doing?
In Addis, in Ethiopia?
All around. If people want to learn more about some of the work, where would be the best place to send them?
The website is TAAC, TAAAC, Toronto Addis Ababa Academic Collaboration. So it's TAAC.ca. That's a work in Ethiopia. Refugee work, I think I sent you a couple of articles. I don't, my anxieties, I absolutely don't write enough, so bad.
Oh, that's okay. I mean, I found lots of different stuff that you had done, so I think
Really?
you're probably being a little harder on yourself than you should be.
You don't hang out with Ruth Lanius. I mean, like, she's a giant. She's a giant.
Well, what I'll do is I'll make sure that I have the link. I'll get that link from you, and then I'll make sure that it's in the show notes so that people have a website that they can go to, and then from there they can learn some more. But and I'll put links in for the different books that you've got as well.
That's kind. Thank you.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Well, that was awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to invest in your health and well-being. Since this podcast is brand new, reviews and subscribers are so vital for us to get off the ground and share this really important information. So if you found this information valuable, please post a review and subscribe to the podcast so you'll get our newest episodes. Also, if you know of someone who would benefit from this, please share it with them. You can also find us on Instagram at #InspireHealthPodcast. If you have a question that you'd like to be addressed, direct message me on Instagram or leave a comment on one of my posts. I would love to hear from you. And you can grab our show notes and free resources for each episode at inspirehealthpodcast.com. So be sure to go online and check it out.